This Saturday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, a rivalry, an ancient rivalry, is reborn. These schools met last year in 2023 where Maryland beat Virginia 42-14 after Virginia took an initial 14-0 lead in the beginning of the first quarter. But, fun college football fact, did you guys know that Virginia and Maryland met annually from 1957 until 2013? And not only was this an old rivalry that died due to conference realignment, this was an ACC, Atlantic Coast Conference rivalry at one point. Virginia is still a part of the Atlantic Coast Conference. Maryland was once a part of the Atlantic Coast Conference before they moved to the Big Ten, joining Rutgers in the 2014 Big Ten editions, and Louisville simply substituted Maryland in the Atlantic Coast Conference. I can't say that the ACC is sad with that exchange. I think Louisville's a better football program, at least over the past decade, compared to Maryland. But Mike Locksley has built a name for himself in Maryland, and that's because he has had back-to-back 8-5 seasons, had a 7-6 season in 2021, and in their Week 1 opener, Maryland looked impressive, and I thought they would beat Michigan State, but they didn't. They fell to the Spartans at home by a score of 27-24, where Michigan State outgained the Terps in first downs, in total yardage. Maryland controlled the clock and had fewer turnovers, and that's typically enough to win the game, but Michigan State averaged more yards per pass attempt, 1.9 extra yards per pass attempt, and they averaged an additional 1.5 yards per carry. That, combined with Maryland missing a field goal and Michigan State converting long plays, including a touchdown through the air, sealed the deal and gave the Spartans a conference win and Maryland a conference loss. Virginia also had a Week 2 conference matchup on the road against Wake Forest. And despite the fact that Virginia lost the turnover battle, they won the game on the road, and they did have a comeback win. Virginia and Michigan State in a similar situation, on the road, trailing for much of the game, and then they come back and win it in the fourth quarter by playing all four quarters and by not giving up, by persevering. So these two teams, Maryland and Virginia, enter with, I'd say, different circumstances, certainly, and potentially a different attitude and mood in the locker room, in the minds of these coaches. This is interesting. We'll have to see where it goes, and I will certainly be watching this game. The line opened up at 2.5 in favor of Maryland. Maryland was favored by 2.5 points initially when the line opened. They're still favored, but they are only laying 1 point on the road. Virginia is getting 1 point at home. ESPN's FPI favors Maryland to win this game 67% of the time out of like the thousands of times they simulate the season from this point onward. Again, Maryland won this game 42-14 in 2023. But with the transfer portal and with the amount that Maryland lost after a 2023 season where they probably could have won 9 or maybe even 10 games had some things bounced differently, and the fact that Virginia is still rebuilding under Tony Elliott, these programs, especially these programs, can rapidly change, and that's the case with any college football program in this new era. Let's look at the offense, then we'll get to the defense here. Maryland has Roman Hemby at running back, and behind Roman Hemby, they have other players as well, like Noland Ray, Colby McDonald, Dejon Williams. Billy Edwards Jr. has shown throughout his years as a backup behind Taulia Tagovailoa that he, like Tagovailoa, has a scrambling capability, one that I think is more pronounced than Tagovailoa's is. You look at the skill position players that Maryland has, what they have at wide receiver, which I think maybe could go to Virginia. I think Virginia has the best overall receiver in Malachi Fields, but Maryland has really good depth at receiver. With Virginia, they have Malachi Fields, who leads the team in receptions with 16, has 248 receiving yards, no receiving touchdowns. They have Trell Harris, who has 2 receiving touchdowns, 129 receiving yards, and 9 receptions. After that, you go all the way down to Jaden Gibson, who has 1 reception for 26 yards. So you want more depth to emerge with Virginia at wide receiver. With Maryland, they have Ty Felton, they have Caden Prather, Octavian Smith Jr. Felton has 330 receiving yards and 3 receiving touchdowns. He may be the best overall wide receiver. You have Caden Prather with 11 receptions for 98 yards. Octavian Smith with 3 receptions for 35. Both teams have good tight ends. Dylan Wade, 6 receptions for 87 yards and a touchdown for Maryland. And then for Virginia, Tyler Neville with 5 receptions, 73 yards, 2 receiving touchdowns. Dakota Twitty is another player to pay attention to in that tight end room. So I gave both teams benefit of the doubt at tight end, a push there. I think at this point throughout the season, Maryland, from what I've seen, how they run the ball and protect their quarterback, I would favor Maryland on the offensive line slightly. Again, we're only 2 weeks through the season, so this is subject to change, and Virginia could totally have the better offensive line because they have some good players on that line of scrimmage that I identified in the preseason. You look at quarterback, though, I would favor Anthony Calandria over Billy Edwards. Billy Edwards is a 171.4 passer rating. 4 touchdowns, 1 interception. He has passed for 564 yards and completed 75% of his passes. He's 14th currently in QBR. Anthony Calandria is a 177.9 passer rating, a 73.4 QBR, which is 34th, 654 passing yards, 72 rushing yards, 5 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He's also completed about 75% of his throws. I do think that Calandria is playing in an inferior supporting cast with an inferior defense. I think he has a higher upside than Billy Edwards Jr. does, and I actually think that you'll see that in this game. He also probably has a lower floor. Calandria is known to turn over the football and make some insane plays in both a good and bad way. I think that through this point in the season, also given the fact that Calandria does have more starting experience than Billy Edwards Jr. does, I would favor him slightly. These teams, though, from what we've seen so far in their 2 games that they've played in their small sample size, do have good quarterbacks relative to the average quarterback in college football. And that's even factoring in the competition they have played against. Billy Edwards Jr. looks like he's basically picking off from where Talia Tagovailoa left off, and Calandria has taken a step forward and showed more of his good side from his freshman campaign, while so far limiting more of his bad side. Checking out the defenses here, Maryland has the better overall defense. I'd say Maryland has the more balanced offense, but Virginia has the greater upside, I would say, offensively. Defensively, I think it's pretty clear Maryland's better on this side of the football. You look at the fact that Virginia allowed 500 yards to Wake Forest, and maybe Wake Forest is better than they were last year, but I doubt they're a good team. Maryland did allow yardage to Michigan State, but at the end of the day, they only allowed 27 points. Nick Marsh's catch at the end, his 77-yard pass from Aiden Childs, it was just a beautiful throw by Childs, who is similar to Calandria in the way that he has a very high ceiling, but his floor is much lower than you would want in a Power 4 starting quarterback. Michigan State, look, their offense clearly has some upside. Maryland's defense did get stops. They did force turnovers. They're not elite by any stretch of the imagination, but if Jack Howes makes that kick, or if the offense for Maryland at the end of the day can clutch up, earn a few first downs, and instead they kick the game-winning field goal and give Howes another chance, they could win that game. They led for much of the game, Maryland did. The entire first quarter, they led for parts of the fourth quarter, much of the fourth quarter. It was tied for about half the third, and they led or tied for a good portion of the second quarter. Maryland had this game in their control, and Michigan State took control away from Maryland. It's what the good coaching staffs do. Jonathan Smith, I think, is an elite head coach with an elite coaching staff. With Virginia, and I know we're talking about the defenses here, but I just think it's more impressive you know it's bad when I'm talking about, well, I don't know, Sam. Which defense is better, as both gave up over 500 yards and long touchdowns and arguably gave the game away? Well, I would rather give up that amount of yardage to Aiden Childs and Nate Carter and to Jonathan Smith than I would to Hank Bachmeier and I forget the name of Wake Forest's head coach. It'll come to me. But Michigan State has more talent than Wake Forest. They have better players than Wake Forest. All in all, I also think they have a better coaching staff than Wake Forest does. Wake Forest, Dave Clawson, that's the name of their head coach. I have to keep all these names in my head. So a rare miss there. But yes, Dave Clawson. I do think that you look at the defensive line of Maryland and the fact that the Terrapins have brought back players who were experienced and respectable last season. For example, they did bring back on the defensive line players like Jordan Phillips. Quashawn Fuller is a player that I really liked coming into this season. We'll see how he performs through the rest of the year. Kellen Wyatt and Ruben Hippolyte come back at linebacker. And also, you have Glendon Miller, who's already had 3 interceptions on the season. Jalen Husky is another great player for the Terrapins in the secondary. And Dante Trader Jr. looks to have an NFL future. He has a pass defended, 7 total tackles. Glendon Miller has 13 total tackles, 3 interceptions on the season. I think he had 2 against Michigan State and then 1 against UConn. I look at this team in Maryland, and they could have the better defense at every position. I think they're better defensively overall. I think it also shows in the fact they held UConn to 7 points, whereas Virginia, they allowed 13 points to their FCS opponent, Richmond. And Richmond's not a great FCS team. They're not like a South Dakota State or a North Dakota State, for example. They're not that caliber of like Missouri Valley Conference FCS level team. The Missouri Valley Conference for the FCS is basically what the SEC is like, except potentially more dominant. I'm not an expert on the FCS, so if you think I'm wrong on that, challenge me in the comments. But from what I understand, it's basically the Missouri Valley Conference who's won all the national championships in the past 10 years at the FCS level. And that's even more dominant than the SEC is, and the SEC is pretty dominant at the national level in Division I FBS college football. Virginia, though, they have some nice players on defense. They have, in particular, I think, some great linebackers to pay attention to, like Trey McDonald and James Jackson, Cam Robinson, who already has a sack. You look at Virginia's secondary, they have some players in the defensive back core who I think are relatively impressive. Jam Jackson, Kempton Shine, Malcolm Green, those are players who already have a pass defended. Jonas Sanker is a good safety. And you look at other guys, too, in that room who I think, look, Virginia was close last year. They were better last season than they were in 2022. And with a quarterback who obviously has a high ceiling and some nice skill position players, they're a team that I think overall, on offense and even on defense, can take a step forward this season. All in all, Maryland, I think, is the better team. Yes, they're on the road, but I think that they're further along. They are who they are at this point. Mike Locksley has built Maryland up to be a good football program, an above-average good football program, who has competed with Michigan and Ohio State and Penn State over the seasons at times, more so with Michigan and Ohio State recently than Penn State, but they've done a good job, I think, relative to their expectations. Maryland has in Mike Locksley. I don't think Mike Locksley is this epic game manager. I think he's proven over and over again that game management is not his strength, but in terms of identifying players who fit his culture and in terms of consistency, and with Maryland, you're not expected to win the Big Ten. He's doing a good job. I think Maryland covers, and I think they win 38-28. I think Maryland's offense with Roman Hemby, with Billy Edwards Jr., with Octavian Smith, Ty Felton, I think they're going to be too much for Virginia. I don't think Virginia has the defense or the players or even the coordinator. They don't have what Michigan State has defensively to hold Maryland to about the mid-20s. I think that Maryland is going to have a little bit of a bounce back game here, a little bit of a revenge and letting out of anger against the Virginia Cavaliers in a game that is a rivalry matchup. And for Virginia, I think they'll play competitively. I think that their offense will perform better than their defense. And that's why I have the score being 38-28. I think there will be some offense in this game. It'll be in a game where I wouldn't be shocked if both teams have over like 400 yards each. But because of Maryland's superior defense, the fact that I think Anthony Colandrea, while being the better quarterback, probably has a higher proclivity of turning over the football than Billy Edwards Jr. does. The matchup here, I just think, in the trenches favors Maryland. Maryland's ground game is much better. They have the better running back, and to this point, I think the better offensive line than Virginia does. And with a quarterback like Anthony Colandrea, he can carry you to a win because he is that talented. But if you're constantly behind and you can't control the game, then those turnovers can show up. And I just think that all those things factored in, Maryland wins this game 38-28, winning and covering, growing to 2-1. Virginia falls to 2-1. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts on this video down below. Thanks to Crash2488 and Brasco Rascal for sponsoring this video and channel as Heisman members. Thanks to Chris Lane, Kyler OH, Ismar, and Tyler Nye for sponsoring this video and channel as All-American members, and also Jilton Cush, new Patreon. And thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, and Janisha Cockrell for sponsoring this video and channel as all conference members. If you want to support the channel, the link to my Patreon page and also to my merchandise store, if you want to purchase merchandise, and I greatly encourage it, is in the description and also in the pinned comment. Have a phenomenal day, guys. Go Cavaliers and go Terps.